Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for sticking with us to the end and for joining us for this session. It's a fireside chat on blockchain, sport, and social impact. My name is Lucy Mills. I'm the founder and chief catalyst at Ready, based in Barcelona. I will be moderating this conversation with two very great friends. Go a little way back and quite a long way back, as is the case with Jake, and really excited to dive into all things Web3 in sport for sustainable development, really thinking about what is the case for Web3 in sport, some of the mechanisms supporting these organizations and initiatives that are using sport for sustainable development. And I have with me Shannon Lanigan, who is the co-founder of All In for Sport DAO. We'll learn more about the work that All In for Sport is doing. Hi, Shannon. Great to have you on. Tuning in from Mexico, so we're all very jealous. And we've also got Dr. Jacob Nash, or Jake, who is the founder of Minded, and like me, has had a lifetime working in the football, soccer industry. Jake, thank you so much for joining in from Denmark. Great to be with you both. We've been in different spaces and different forums together. So yeah, we should be up for quite a dynamic and exciting conversation. So really just to set the scene, we're really grateful for the Blockchain4Good Summit to add this focus on sport and this intersection of sports, blockchain, and social impact. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we saw in the sports industry, so at the time I was working at FC Barcelona, Jake was also working at a professional football club in Denmark. Shannon, you've got quite a different journey and background in sport as well, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But about 5 or 6 years ago, we really saw this Web3 kind of hype, boom, interest, influx of attention of the role of blockchain technology in sport. We started to see athletes, sports clubs, sports leagues, federations thinking about ways that they could integrate blockchain technology for different reasons, from looking at governance through to operational efficiencies and instruments like ticketing, through to how they could use blockchain to support fan loyalty memberships, thinking about how to connect with, engage with global fans in this increasingly professionalized, globalized sports landscape. So we had, all of a sudden, we had this hype and boom of conversations around metaverses and digital collectibles. Yeah, it was, I think since then, it's been quite a journey of ups and downs, a lot of learnings, a lot of brilliant projects that have connected fans to sports, and some projects that really we've had to look within us, in ourselves as a sports sector, and think about really why these projects were happening and so on. Then we have an entirely different part of the sports ecosystem that has been growing over the past 15, 20 years or so, which is really about using sport as a tool, as a vehicle to contribute to social change and contribute to the sustainable development goals. Both Shannon and Jake also come from this sport for good space, and there's a whole ecosystem of foundations, NGOs, federations that are and have been innovating with sport and designing and delivering sport-based programs in really dynamic ways that have had really positive outcomes on people, on communities, on society, and the planet. So then we have this kind of interjection or insertion of the case and the role of Web3 within this context of sport for good. And this is what I really want to lean into and talk about with Shannon and Jake today. So maybe just I'll hand over to Jake. First of all, maybe you can just say hello, quick introduction. And also, So, of course, you were working in professional football. You have been for about 20 years, not wanting to show your age. But in parallel, you were you were part of Web3 communities, and so you also saw this convergence of the sport that you were working in and Web3. So, what is it about football or sports more broadly that you were seeing and kind of thinking about at the time as to why sports could be a good space for Web3?
Okay, yeah. So, hello everyone. My name's Jake, and I've had kind of two careers at the same time. One was in the professional football world, as Lucy just said, over 24 years, and at the same time, I guess I'm a scholar, and I trained as a philosopher. And I think that's the way I'd like to kind of answer the question, Lucy, because I think one of the things that it's easy to understand, even if you only have kind of a little bit of knowledge about the world of sport and especially football, is that the corridors of power are very narrow. And a big part of when I did my doctoral research is I was trying to understand how power functions within that world and in between different types of actors. When you start to look at it at specific examples, you can see that equality, equity, decentralization, democratization are all forces that are kind of stalling in their progression in the football world, whilst in other parts of our social lives, they feel like they're actually accelerating to some degree. That's up for debate now, actually. But of course, up until very recent history and into January, it kind of felt like there was this liberal incrementalism that gradually there was a kind of provision of access of rights, decision making, autonomy that was going to a wider and wider group of people. In sport, that can often not feel like it is the way. And I think that is what always drew me to blockchains. Of course, I got caught up in all the hype, and a big part of the communities that I was in was about that hype. But I also was really attracted to this world that I'm sure will come up later of, regenerative crypto economics and the kind of projects that were there. And I felt there was some inspirational North Stars in that world that football especially could follow, and I believe will at some stage.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Okay, so the two phrases I think we'll come back to, so corridors of power and regen football. So I'm going to hold those with me while I hand over to Shannon for also an introduction. And you come at sport quite differently. So, but I want to touch on the role that you had prior to All In for Sport with Kraus House DAO, which was one of these early examples of Web3 in professional sport.
Yeah, so my background in education is science, kinesiology, athletic rehabilitation. I worked with athletes for a number of years, all through my university and after schooling as well. But then I kind of changed into the social impact space and really learned a lot about not-for-profits and the charitable sector. And during that time of what Jake was referring to, of this kind of bull market and hype around crypto, I started understanding, exploring what the different opportunities were out there, the different projects, and I was really drawn to something called decentralized autonomous organizations. For me, that felt like a real opportunity in a world of crazy chaos. I was like, well, what are some real world things that I can sink my teeth into that make sense from the world that I know? And DAO certainly did that. And so there was a group called Seed Club, which is basically an incubator for all kinds of new Web3 projects. And Seed Club had a group called Kraus House DAO, which was kind of one of the OGs of decentralized autonomous organizations, with the audacious goal of buying a fractional ownership stake in an NBA team. And so lots and lots of learnings came from that, but lots of really great learnings. Like, there was really incredible people in that space and in that DAO that really felt that the opportunity for fan engagement and fan ownership was legitimate, and really was something that inspired me to continue along and understanding, well, what does that experience mean a little bit more tangibly, and not only from a club ownership side of things, but an actual from a fan on the ground, and what are the fans experiencing. And I think that that's kind of what led us more into this social impact area space of sport for good.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Shannon. Brilliant. Two journeys that I feel like we could spend really hours talking about and unpacking. Okay, so Jake, I want to go back to this the concept that you talked about, regen football. And yeah, can you just elaborate on that? And well, it's something that we've been nerding out on, we've been writing about, we've been exploring in different ways for a number of years. But can you pull out some of the key principles here? And for many in this summit who have been in kind of Web3 regenerative spaces, they'll be familiar with this side of things. But when you put that in a football context, what does that look like, or what is the potential there?
Yeah. Okay, great. So, I mean, the idea of regen football is very much in the way that Shannon just described for DAOs, right? It's kind of like looking at a very old institution and asking how would we make that different, and kind of starting with a very foundational question, which is that if we were to go and select a group of humanity and just ask them the question, if you could start football again from tomorrow, from scratch, what would you keep and what would stay the same? And we can surmise, we can guess that a bunch of those people would choose to keep something quite central to football today a little bit different. To give an example of this, we were just doing some polling in a different community that I'm in called Season 1. And we were just doing some polling on what people felt the most anxious about or concerned about the future of football. And the two biggest issues that came up were the cost of football on the one hand and equality within the game on the other, right? So another way of saying that is the centralization of power. So regen football is trying to kind of think about, it's a theoretical construct for an alternative model, and it has a couple of principles at its heart. The first is that it gets built in a somewhat democratic way, right? And that people, much like in Kraus House, have autonomy over certain types of decisions within the group. That's the first part. The second part is that it's kind of like inspired by a thing that I think decentralized autonomous organizations were inspired by, but goes a little bit further back. There's a guy called Frederick Laloux, and he wrote this book called Reinventing Organizations. It's all about something called a teal organization, which would essentially be a DAO before it was called a DAO. And there are a bunch of companies that are actually run in this way. Very interestingly, when Laloux did his research, what he discovered is these companies did not, companies run in this way. These companies did not really know about each other. So they were just out there on their own, doing their own thing. An example of which is the games company Valve, that used this model, totally decentralized, no hierarchy, high degrees of autonomy, and what they call meaningful work. So like a kind of organic way of making decisions that are based almost on kind of spiritual principles and feelings, so that you kind of gravitate towards certain types of work and people, and then kind of come away from it when it has run its course. These kind of principles, I think, are the things that underpin this idea of regen football. And then there's a kind of, these are spaces related to regenerative crypto economics, but they're also in a world that I think we're going to come to a little bit later, which is adjacent to regen crypto, which I think is this idea of game B. And that's like, how do you actually functionally imagine an alternative? And we know that whether it's with the organizations that Frederick Laloux looked at, which are real and happening now, or whether it's with big institutions that seem very old and immovable like football, they're very, very hard to change.
And you mentioned Season 1. Also, this is what happens when you get a philosopher on. And I'm very used to this, and I'm barely following, and I should be used to it by now.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Season 1. So just tell us about this as one of the communities. I know it's Web3 inspired as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's like a kind of digital higher learning institute that is at the place where technology and the future of our sport combine. So it's very early stages. Myself and the two other co-founders, Ben Mee, the Premier League footballer, and Matt Warner, who was a footballer who actually made his way out of the game about 10, 15 years ago. They're both kind of tech nerds as well. They're really, really into this idea of what the sport can be in the future and the fact that it won't be the same. And we've just welcomed our first 100 learners, first 100 community members, and yeah, it's going really, really quick. But check it out, season1.info. I wasn't meaning to plug it at all. I really wasn't. I just wanted to talk about the poll that was in it, but there you go.
But it's interesting though, because there's this appetite among sports fans, among people in the sports community, to really have an active role, to participate, to learn, to engage, and so on, right? As opposed to the kind of historical way of maybe, which was one directional, which was turning up, buying a ticket, walking through the turnstile. Now sports today is much more immersive and interactive and so on. Maybe if we just switch, we've talked a lot about professional football, which has a very is a very specific sport and case, and tried and tested Web3 project, and also makes the case for regen like very, very strong. Let's go to the more community side of sport, which, Shannon, is where All In for Sport is. Yeah, can you tell us about All In for Sport, and why you're a DAO, why you're using blockchain technology to power the work that you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So in Kraus House DAO, what was happening was organically we were starting to get these communities coming to us and asking for funding, and so we would help in some way, and maybe help fund a basketball tournament or something through the DAO, and then we would get from the community a year-long plan of, if they had more money, this is what they would do. And we started to realize that there's a bigger opportunity here, in terms of how communities are funded and their access to capital. And we know blockchain has the ability to provide funding to the unbanked. We know that it has the opportunity to become verifiable, and you can follow the capital flows. And we started to really wonder what it would look like from all areas. So what would it look like as a funder, and what would the mechanisms needed to be to unlock the capital? And then what would it look like from a community, and how could community organize in a way that could access the capital in ways that didn't require them to write grants, to have the institutional knowledge that often is needed in order to unlock those capital flows. And so that's kind of how All In for Sport began. And we began testing just kind of very small experiments. Those experiments led to conversations with people in technology across sectors. So not just in sport, but people that are working in regenerative finance, people who are working in, environmental issues, and really bringing those people together, to kind of mash all the knowledge and learning together in our gathering sessions. And that's now where we really see this bigger opportunity to begin to test a lot of kind of micro experiments out in the wild. There were some earlier sessions I was listening to, and I feel like that's kind of been a theme, that the technology exists, but the builders and the experimentations and the actual use cases for proof of concepts are what we need. And that's what we're looking at in the sporting space, is to really begin working with communities, begin working with funders to start to understand some of these concepts a little bit more clearly.
Great. And so communities here, they might be volunteer-led organizations or associations or community clubs.
100%. Yeah. So we just recently got accepted into the International Olympic Committee Tech 365 Engage program. And it's really helped expand our network with many builders and people within the space, and really just trying to learn from them. We feel like the best place to start is with the communities and hearing what the communities actually need. And there's been some really great groups who've done this very deep community work already. So we're looking to work with them to understand how they've been successful in supporting community to make community decisions on projects, what that looks like from a governance standpoint, and then how can we really try to translate that onto the blockchain so it becomes something that's a little bit more scalable.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got cases in community sport, sport for development, around governance, around decision making, financing, allocation, and decisions around capital. We've got engaging communities in a more I guess democratic way. You touched a little bit on impact measurement. These are all cases that we've seen in the wider development and humanitarian sector that's been discussed today. So within the support for development sector as well, there's a big case and a big need here. Jake, I know that you've been in and around sport for development for some time. We've seen there's been an increasing interest among practitioners within this sport for development ecosystem. It's still early, as Shannon said. Where do you see, what do you see the potential for this sport for development ecosystem?
Yeah, I really like ideas that kind of turbocharge things that might already be working. So I like the idea of retroactive funding. And I like the idea that you can take something like how teams are doing in terms of national team appearances, for example, in the women's game, and then retroactively funds the clubs that were part of those women's early journeys, who are usually grassroots clubs, usually struggling to kind of thrive and survive. And I think that's a really powerful idea, and one that's starting to get a bit of traction in the Web3 space. I think generally those ideas that take one of the principles, and this is underneath regen football really as well, the idea that you kind of give back more than you take, and that it kind of gets better by the sum of those parts. I think there's a whole package of possible interventions that could possibly work in that way. But the key thing, and I, it's easy to go back to examples like Crowdsource because they got so much attention. But if you think of trying to bottle the not hype, but the excitement that people who were even way outside of basketball got from looking at that and thinking, oh my word, something could be really different here, that would widen those narrow corridors of power within the sport. I think if you find the things that connect that are like attention grabbing with the things that are at the grassroots, then you're on to a winner, because sport is still an entertainment business. We've got 4 billion fans or practitioners across the world in football alone, and attention is basically part of the kind of dynamic, the consumer dynamic of it. So those are the things that I would look for if you were trying to kind of grab the things that might work soon.
And do you feel more optimistic about the role of Web3 in the more social impact sport for development side, or do you see it still having a prominent place within professional sport?
I think what I'm trying to say is those things need to connect, and that Web3 is one of, if the medium is the message, Web3 is one of those possible mediums. The caveat that I would put against that is that we're going into a really wild time geopolitically, and it's very hard to really know what the effect of that is going to be. And probably those macros are going to be more affecting than anything that we decide to do or not do in Web3.
Great. Thanks, Jake. And Shannon, you mentioned Tech 365, and I just want to draw attention to this as well, because it's an interesting project for people to check out. So, and I'm also part of it, so I know quite a lot about it. It's an initiative coming from the International Olympic Committee, which is the IOC, which is the international governing body for the Olympic movement that also runs the Olympic Games. And so within the IOC, there's a section within the IOC called Olympism 365. And this is the part of the IOC that is taking the Olympism values and delivering programs and initiatives around the world to promote those values and to promote physical activity and sport and so on. And within the Olympism 365 section, there's a newly launched Innovation Hub. And this Innovation Hub is investing in and incubating innovations within sport that have a positive social impact. And it's really one of the first of its kind initiatives for the reason that there's a specific focus on emerging technologies and the role of emerging technologies in sport for sustainable development and Tech 365, as Shannon mentioned. And so from the IOC and the hub perspective, the role of emerging technologies in sport for sustainable development is super new, super nascent, still kind of learning and seeing what's out there in the wider space. And so we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could identify innovators across the world who are already doing great things and create a collective of leaders, of innovators to help shape what the future of the use of emerging technologies is in sport for sustainable development. And so Shannon is representing All In for Sport DAO as one of the innovators within Tech 365. Just give a shout out really, because that's of course the IOC in Olympism 365, also giving that leg up to initiatives and innovators in this intersection of Web3 sport and social impact. So yes, I'm glad we could mention that. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. We've got somebody saying, love the term regen football. Great.
Can I just say about that though, Lucy, before you say, because I thought we were going to talk about Game B as well, and I just want people to know that.
Okay, let's do it. We've got time.
No, the term regen football, there is no regen football without Lucy Mills. Lucy Mills is the co-author of that idea. She is, yeah. I didn't want anybody to go away thinking that this was a me thing. This is a very much a you thing.
Thanks, Jake. And I thought you were here to talk about Game B football. Okay, so as we wrap up then, final comments from you both about I guess what you think from your perspectives and your experiences, what you think, what you're most optimistic by, and what you think the greatest potential is in sport to make sure that sport is continuing to have a positive contribution in society. And Shannon, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that the thing I'm most inspired by is enabling communities to do good where they are. I feel like that is, the communities know the power of sport. We don't have to tell them the power of sport, but when sport is used as a conduit to really bring people together and to create an economy within their own communities, I feel like there's, that's a real unlock for a lot of communities that are lacking that. And I love the opportunity. I get excited about that.
Amazing. So enabling communities, awesome. Love that. And Jake?
For me, it's about like unlearning old models for all of us, like on a population-wide scale, and relearning in a slightly different way. Part of the reasons why it's so difficult to imagine an alternative for good industry or an alternative sport industry is because our imagination has kind of been hedged by the way in which we were taught to learn, I think. And I think we need to kind of be radical in the way that we rethink and unlearn things and imagine possible alternatives, whether it's for our sports or for the for good sector.
Great. And of course, there's going to be, people are entering into the sports industry all the time, right? And that educational experience is changing, the sports industry is changing. And so the way we operate and the way we think about sport and we're kind of we can be all part of shaping it. And yeah, I really like this concept as well of the notion of this permissionless internet, which I think, of course, there's lots of discussion and debate around this as a concept itself, but I think when you apply it within our context, sport is about people. Sport is should be and is participatory, and has a way, as Shannon said, to connect with other people and bridge communities. So we very much are convinced of the power, the potential, the mechanisms of blockchain to drive some of this positive connection in sport and to shape the future of sport. So thank you so much to both of you for joining this brilliant discussion. We're very, very great with time. We're finishing on the dot, ready for the networking. So bravo to both of you. And definitely check out All In for Sport DAO. Definitely check out season 1 and both individuals, professionals on LinkedIn, and yeah, always sharing and inspiring. So thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great.